I believe that climate change is really the issue of our times. Anything else pales in comparison when it comes to the importance of an impact upon our species. And it's really time for us to use our big evolved brains to get past this stage of denial and start to work on problem solving. We can't ignore something just because we can't see its impact already. It's clear the direction that we're headed. I was watching a show called Vice on HBO, a news program that was in Greenland, and it talked about how predictions even 5 years ago are now, we're 60 years ahead in terms of the warming impact beyond predictions that were even 5 years ago. So there's a very quickly unfolding environmental catastrophe, which will result in not only higher sea levels that will flood many areas of the world, and but also when you have warmer oceans, you have greater storms that arise because the evaporation of the water into the air. Hurricane Sandy, the storm that occurred rather recently, was said to be as large and as intense as it was because of warm waters. There are also, the reason it's not just called global warming, but there's climate change, is there's going to be more extremes. So we had an intense drought here in California where I live, and when you're trying to support over 7 billion human lives on the planet, you have to pay attention to our ability to feed everybody. And in some areas of the world, that is a great challenge. In America, we're not thinking in those terms usually, and not in terms of not producing enough food. But that certainly could change if we experience massive droughts and so forth. I heard recently that the most optimal number for maintaining a balance between humans, the way we live now, and the planet Earth, the optimal number would be around 1.5 billion people, and we're over 7 billion people. So we're not going to get down to 1.5 billion unless there are some intense catastrophes. But I do believe, the first idea that I wanted to share is taking a break from breeding so much. I know that in the U.S., everybody feels that they have a certain right to create this kind of television image of a big happy family and so forth. But one of the problems is that in the United States, we have an impact on the environment that's 1,000 times greater than third world countries, in which they don't use as much energy. And so I know that the desire to have offspring is very, very powerful and can be gripping on a deep biological level. But by at least reducing, the number of children that one has, if you're not like me and don't want to have any children at all, at least try to limit it to 1, possibly 2 children. And know that in that process, you're slowing down this rapid growth that is really, it's going to be more and more difficult to provide resources as third world and second world countries become increasingly technological, and we see what's happening in China, the intense pollution by all the new coal factories and so forth. It's forcing them to no longer be able to ignore it because they can't see through the smog. And so they're going to be more and more focused upon renewable energies and so forth. And they're already, for a long time, have had strict limitations on the number of children that can be, that you can have there in your families. And so we have to do this voluntarily, and it's through a shift in consciousness where it's not just about us trying to continue to recreate some glorified image from the 1950s of what a family looks like and start thinking in terms of the global family, because if we don't, another factor is that we're going to continue to increase our lifespans. And, with medicine and technology and just basically good information about how to stay healthy increases around the world, that is another reason why we have to slow our roll on all of the, creating new life. We have to focus on what is going to keep life on the planet sustainable. And, I don't think there's a reason to panic about the Earth situation, because panic only leads to fearful reactions and impulsive kind of thoughts, and it can also lead to depression and anxiety, and none of this is good. But let's look realistically at how many humans Earth can basically handle, and realize that if we continue at rapid rates, then that's not going to work too well. I remember seeing Barbara Marx Hubbard around 1997. She was speaking in San Francisco, and she's a futurist, and she talked about how she felt that there was a shift going on, that many women who for a long time felt that having children was their primary purpose were starting to shift their focus and realizing that she perceived it as a shift in kind of a global consciousness, in which we have done a good enough job of making sure that we have enough people on the planet, but now we have to really focus, good enough in the sense that we can survive major, disease outbreaks and other kinds of catastrophes and so forth. But we're at a point now where a large population increases the likelihood of famine, and that we can do the greatest damage to our species by increasing its population now. So we have to switch our focus to making life good for who is already here instead of creating new life. And I've also heard some statistics that are encouraging in terms of, as more and more women enter the workforce on a global level, this will slow down population rates. But we have to go beyond slow trends and start to shift more towards immediate thinking, because we're already headed towards increasing ocean levels. Predictions I've heard are for hundreds of years. Even if everything, if we stopped all carbon emissions right now, we're still going to be facing an increase in ocean levels for hundreds of years. And so we're going to have to, start responding to that. And my greatest concern is about the weather patterns that are going to increase in intensity. We have no precedent. We don't know what we're getting into. But there's really, really good reason to believe that a lot of people are going to be killed. And so if we can reduce the population gradually and consciously as we move along as a species, we can help find greater balance between ourselves and the planet. Another perspective that I wanted to share, a second idea, is that in the United States, the emissions that contribute to global, the kind of greenhouse effect from cattle is greater than that which comes from cars. Now, we have all of our cattle kind of stuffed away where we don't have to look at them for the most part, and see their suffering. That does not make the gas emissions from cattle and the process of fattening them up. And, it doesn't make that go away just because we can't see it. And this is a theme, I believe, throughout the climate change crisis that we face, is just because we can't see it makes it easier to ignore. So I find it just amazing that with all the cars that we have, an electric and there's still emissions associated with electric vehicles and so forth. That electricity is still produced often by, gas and coal. it's amazing that cattle is creating a greater impact than cars. So one of the reasons I decided to become vegan over a year ago is because I care about the earth, because I care about the impact that it has to the energy it takes to raise a cow as opposed to plant-based foods. And it isn't really that difficult. And I know that like meat and dairy are very addictive in terms of what you feel you have a right to when you're just going through normal socialization and so forth. For me, the first step was developing animal empathy. It started with my cat and really observing my cat and feeling my connection and realizing a cat is not entirely different from a cow and a pig and so forth, and that I just can't imagine standing by while somebody kills my cat because they're hungry. Have a bean and rice burrito, There are an increasing amount of foods that are vegan that are satiating. I've done a video about vegan foods that are satiating on this channel. And it's not that difficult. You can not only improve the planet's health, but you can improve your personal health by reducing the amount of clogged artery-related likelihood of death related to heart attack and stroke and so forth when you're not eating meat and dairy. But keeping focused upon the issue of climate change, it would be so much better if we could increase the amount of vegans on the planet to the point where we're not, contributing to the climate change through raising all these animals that we are just, that are existing just to fill our bellies. If it's hard to even think of becoming vegan, try doing it part-time at first. I think there's a book called VB6 or something like that. It stands for Vegan by 6 or Vegan Before 6, where it talks about beginning your day vegan and then after 6 p.m. eating as you normally would. That's a start. But I feel that ultimately, as our empathy for animals, for ourselves, and for our planet grows, then more people will be making a switch towards a diet that is good for all involved. The third idea I wanted to present is putting pressure upon power companies and anybody that affiliated with these. This is really the last monopoly. I feel like I have options for phone now. I have options for entertainment, but power company, that's still, there's still one option for me if I want to go with the grid. And so anytime you have a monopoly, you have a hell of a lot of money, and I think that it's a moral imperative to reinvest in clean renewable sources, solar and wind, and to make that transition, not from merely a sense of what will be most profitable in the short term, but what will be most helpful to the planet in the long term. I mean, solar technology has grown so much, and just in the last couple decades alone, there's increased efficiency in solar panels, and so creating huge solar fields and just incredible expanses of windmills and just being able to utilize profits that they make from our monthly payments, just putting it back at an increasing rate towards renewables, and then being able to make the switch constantly. The fourth suggestion I wanted to pass along is supporting politicians who are not in denial about climate change. Plain and simple. In the United States, it tends to be that, people on the left, Democrats and so forth, progressives, they are accepting science. They are accepting what is real. And Republicans, conservatives, they're more likely to kind of stick their head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich and just deny what is happening, because it's all about, the conservative vision is about clinging to the past and trying to create this vision of the past in which the 1950s were good for all white people, and wouldn't that be great to go back to it and not have to think about these uncomfortable things such as widespread famine and intense hurricanes wiping out millions of people. So politically, you can make a difference by who you support, and I think that it's clear for the most part who is willing to embrace these problems, so that we're not just trying to solve them on an individual level. It can make you feel pretty impotent and helpless if you think about what impact you're having by filling your little recycling bin, knowing that you're one of 7 billion people. But when widespread policies begin to reflect conscious governments, then you have a huge impact. So it's about slowing things down, making it manageable till we find a sense of balance with the planet. It is not a hopeless situation. I mean, the way I look at it, imagine if Mars was as in good of shape as Earth, and we could go there right now and start populating the planet. The problem is Mars has a human population of 0 at the time of this video, and so and the human population has been growing so quickly. In recent decades, it's just been shooting upwards at a rate that is not sustainable. So if we had another planet that was as sustainable as Earth in terms of the water and plants and air and so forth, we could destroy that as well by just kind of breeding ourselves out of existence. And let's use Earth as an experiment in what consciousness can do and how we can create a habitable planet now that we know what we know. For a long time, people were ignorant. When the Industrial Revolution began, they didn't know what pumping all the smoke into the air was going to do. I mean, Earth seemed so huge and so limitless. How could they know that they could impact and increase this greenhouse effect concept that they didn't know about? But now we know there's no excuses, so we have to begin to make a shift and basically, make our lives more peaceful. It's a pretty uncomfortable and anxiety-producing thing to live on a planet that you feel is heading in the wrong direction. So what makes you feel better is changing your interaction with the planet. And when I heard, what's her name? Elaine, Aron, I think is the name of the author of The Highly Sensitive Person. I saw her speak recently about how a lot of HSPs, highly sensitive persons, are concerned. I consider myself an HSP. And throughout not only our species but other species, it's said that there's a percentage, for humans around 20%, not too different in other animals, mammals, that have this highly refined sensitivity because that benefits the whole. When they're tuning in to the more subtle issues and the subtle potential problems, it helps the species because they can pay attention to things that others might not be aware of. And I think that is part of why HSPs are concerned about climate change at this time, because it's a big issue and it needs to be dealt with. And I think that in the process, the positive thing is that it gives us something as an entire species, regardless of our national borders and government affiliations. It gives us something to work together towards and can really help us bond because we're in this together. No matter where pollution is happening, it affects everybody because jet streams and so forth are blowing this stuff all around the world. So it doesn't matter where you live, it matters what the industrial output of pollution is wherever it exists on the planet. So it's something that cannot be ignored by anyone. So these are my thoughts on all of that. Thanks for listening.